there was a controversy that came to light out of this rule. There's a lot of pages to this rule, so there's a lot of things in there that maybe don't come to light immediately after it's published. So I had Alex Bosco, the inventor of pistol braces, on last week on the show, and he noted that there is this issue with imported pistol braced guns because there's a federal law that deals with imported rifles that says you can't have more than 10 parts that are imported for a rifle that can't itself be imported, if that makes sense to anyone listening. Firearms regulation can be very complicated. But the point is that only applied to rifles. And so people were importing pistols of the same sort of platform as, like, say, an AK-47. I think the Draco is a common example of one of these guns that would be affected by this rule that's pretty popular. But you can import this or parts from it as a pistol variant with a pistol brace attached to it, and it doesn't violate this law. Now, the problem comes in with the ATF now considering effectively all pistol braced guns to be rifles, and to be short barrel rifles at that. But the key issue here is that it's now considered rifle, and they say not only now is it considered rifle, but it always was a rifle. And so that means when you put that pistol brace on it or assembled it here in the United States, that was a crime. And the ATF talks about this in the rule. They say that removing the brace doesn't rectify that crime of assembly. And then they go on to sort of imply, at least I would say, that what you can do with those guns is only turn them in or destroy them. This is in a section where they're talking about the monetary impact of this rule. And so they have to, for the way the rulemaking process goes, they have to try and calculate what effect the rule is going to have on people who are affected by it. And so they interestingly put everyone who owns the rule is called section 922R, and I put everyone with a gun that's affected by this into the category of people they consider who are going to be turning them in, just alongside the people who can't legally own short barrel rifles in whatever state they live in, because some states don't allow you to possess them at all. And so that made someone like Alex and a lot of other people assume that they're basically forestalling this option of either removing the brace or registering the gun, which could have a pretty big impact. But ATF now says, I've reached out to them to try and get some clarity on this issue. And they say that you can, in fact, either remove the brace or register these affected guns just the same way you could with any other gun affected by this rule.
Which is fine, all things considered. I guess I'm glad as that goes for the owners of these firearms. But again, if that was the intent, then why in this portion of the rule, or the impact statement of the rule, why break out foreign produced pistols and kind of set them aside and treat them as if they're special and different than domestically produced pistols with braces on them?
Yeah, I think that's still a very good question, right? This is still, the ATF can say whatever it wants about how it's going to interpret these things. And I think it's important to get them on record, given the controversy over, how people with these guns are supposed to comply with this rule if they choose to comply with it. But, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they put out a statement that solves all the issues in the rule itself. This was something that I talked to him briefly about it, and that was the point that he made. Like, yeah, they can say that, but it doesn't change what the rule actually says. They can put out a public statement or Q&A on their website or whatever, but it doesn't change what the rule actually says itself. And there's still, going to be questions, I think, raised in court over this exact issue.
I think you're right. And again, first of all, why should we trust any given interpretation from the ATF when they have demonstrated, the ability to turn around and say, actually, never mind. We now interpret this to be completely different. And by the way, we always have interpreted it this way. There's something very Orwellian going on here, Stephen. And it goes back. Look, we saw the same thing with the unfinished frames and receivers, right?
And
when
with
this was first put out, with bump stocks too, but with frames and receivers specifically, when it wasn't Polymer 80, but it was Division 80. Was in court suing over the new rule on unfinished frames and receivers. They said, this is going to shut down our company. And the DOJ attorney said, no, it's not, because this only applies to kits. If you're just selling an 80% unfinished, receiver or a frame by itself, you're fine. The law doesn't cover that. It's only these kits that you have to worry about. And then what was it? A month ago, 6 weeks ago?
Yep.
They come back and say, oh, actually, never mind. It's not just the kits. Now, it is actually the receivers themselves. If you got a jig, we consider that to be a kit, right? So they are constantly going back and changing their minds and telling us, okay, what we said to you 2 months ago is not what we're saying today.
Yeah.
So I think that Alex is right to be concerned about that. I think everybody is right to be concerned about this, because this is, I think, fundamentally the heart of the problem about what we're talking about here. When we talk about these administrative abuses, the ATF has the power to set regulations. They don't have the power to make law, and they don't have the power to make law while pretending that they're making existing regulations or reinterpreting existing regulations. And ultimately, I think that's what's going on here. I don't know how willful this is, but it's very easy to see this as attempts by the ATF to sort of push and prod and poke to see how far they can, what they can get away with doing here.